you very much, Holly, and good evening, everyone. I've actually have hoped to come to your school for about a decade now, because your school probably has the most poetic name of any Waldorf school, the Prairie Moon Waldorf School. And I truly have wanted to come here for quite a while, and I'm just struck by what a beautiful school you are creating. And I say you all, because it really takes a whole community of people to bring forth a school like this. And what an incredible setting you have, that the children get to be out here on the prairie with the wind and the sun and these great vistas every day. It's really something special. I never knew Kansas was quite so beautiful. It's very, very touching for me to see the beauty of this landscape and to meet so many interesting people. There's a book that came out not too long ago, Daniel Pink. Does anyone know Daniel Pink's work? He wrote a book a few years back called A Whole New Mind, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future. And Pink said that there were 6 attributes that were really needed in the 21st century. And he spoke about the importance of being able to weave and express the story, the narrative, to really put things in a compelling narrative form that would speak to people. He spoke about the importance of design in our times and how really we're all, when we go into consumer mode in the stores, we look at things now and we say, oh, this has got a nice design. And there's a certain elegance in thinking if we can actually go into designing things that have not only functionality but also beauty in their design. He spoke about the importance of imparting meaning into everything that we do, but certainly in our work. And absolutely the importance of being able to synthesize things, because there's so much information. How do we pull it together and make it into a coherent whole? And then to move it to another level, I would say, where we actually begin to play with that which we are working with. If we've practiced it enough that we can own it, then we actually can get to the place where we can really play with it. And that's a fun state, because then we're in a flow state where we can really do something with the elements that we've mastered. But he also then said, importantly, that a needed attribute for the 21st century is empathy. And I take that to mean not only being truly connected and seeking to understand and be with someone, but in a larger sense, really this ability that we need now to stay connected, to have authentic connection with each other. Well, it's an interesting book, and he's a fun reader. But I wanted to share this and then also share a response from Patrick Bassett, who's the president of the National Association of Independent Schools. And what Bassett said after he read this book, and Bassett is not a Waldorf educator, but he's well aware of Waldorf education and how it's changing the face of education in America. Bassett said, Waldorf schools already get this and are already doing this. So it's interesting that someone outside of our movement would actually even affirm the intentions of Waldorf education. But I think it's even more than what Pink says. What I wanted to touch on tonight is a little bit of how some of the modern research is starting to show links to what Waldorf education has been doing for 100 years. One of the interesting affirmations is, first of all, coming from, I think, some leading thought questions that we have to consider for ourselves. And that is, for one, is the title of the talk and the little write-up in the talk said, how do we actually really prepare the children for the future, for this rapidly changing 21st century? But even more so, how do we prepare children and support them so that we're actually supporting their healthy development in this rapidly changing century? And then I would say, even perhaps most importantly of all, what does it mean to be fully human. As we move into this century, and there's so many images that confront the children, they range from the reptiles of Jurassic Park to the robots of Star Wars. Where is the human being? And can we actually consider for ourselves, what does it mean to be fully human? What would be a balanced picture of a human being? As many of you know, Waldorf educations speak about the importance of head, hands, and heart. And the other way that we sometimes speak about that is just that this is an education of thinking and feeling and willing. And by willing, what is meant by that is the volition of an individual so that they can actually do something in the world. But there's a little saying that I like very much. It encapsulates the whole of Waldorf education. It says, what the heart says is good and true. The head can plan and the hands can do. And there's this balanced picture of being able to have clarity in the thinking, but first of all, knowing in your heart what's the good path of action, and then, importantly, being able to have the strength of will to do it. How many of us know people who have all kinds of grand ideas, but they never seem to come to anything? Or they're so buffeted around in their emotional life that they're also not able to get traction in the things that they might want to do. So it's important that there's a balance in these three attributes. And I think that saying says it in a beautiful way. What the heart says is good and true, the head can plan, and the hands can do. So there's this threefold picture of a balanced human being, that if we could have all of this cultivated, supported for the young children, that would be nice, wouldn't it? So that they really had all attributes of a wise, you could say, sensitive, empathetic, feeling, emotional life, clarity in their thinking, with all kinds of different intelligences in their thinking, and then the strength of will to do that which they would wish to do. So they could stand as free human beings, really able to impart purpose and direction to their own lives. Well, it's interesting, this threefold picture is something that actually had been indicated by Paul MacLean from the National Institutes of Health when he brought forth this model, which he had called the triune brain, but I think he's referring to it now as the tripartite brain. And some of you might be familiar with this, where MacLean showed that the brain really through the eons of time has evolved in three significant stages. The first one being this core structure, sometimes known as the hindbrain, the reptilian brainstem, and within this brainstem are sensory motor abilities, but also the most primitive instinctual reactions. And then MacLean said on top of that, there's this other newer brain that came in, the paleo-mammalian brain, which was the limbic system, which had more of the emotionality and the ability to connect with others. Then, of course, the more recent brain is the neocortex, the thinking brain that really has come in. Then MacLean also saw that this is the most recent part of the neocortex, the prefrontal lobes. Now, what's interesting about this is that you need to have development in the lower structures of the brain all the way up so that you can get the full feathering into the higher regions of the brain. So you want to have lots of sensory motor development, but you also want to make sure that the person has abilities beyond the instinctual reaction, because this is the seed of reactions like territorialism, breeding issues, hoarding, aggression. And we would want a young human being to be able to go past that. But sometimes we see people that actually have been stuck where they're somewhere at this level still, right? That they react, and it's almost as if they're reacting out of this fight, flight, or freeze part of their brain. But we can do better than that, and we can educate our young people better than that. Now this, of course, is not the brain, but it's just McLean's model. But I wanted to show just a little diagram of the brain and make a few points about this. So here's the largest structure of the brain. Here's the hindbrain. And importantly, this is a part of the hindbrain called the cerebellum. And then these are the structures that you could say came in with the limbic brain. And then here's the neocortex and the prefrontal lobes here. And the more that we give full development to all these areas, the more you're going to get developed in the higher regions of the brain. And importantly, this aspect of the lower brain, the cerebellum, is very important. This is sometimes known as the small brain. It has 1/10 of the overall size and weight of the total brain, but it has 50% of the neurons are concentrated in the cerebellum. It has to do with sensorial development, with motoric development. So it's very much enriched the more the young child has movement, especially rhythmic coordinated movement, and they're able to combine it with things like singing and music. Then you're going to get a lot of enrichment in the cerebellum. In this region of the brain, in the limbic brain, this has to do with aspects of emotion and connection, but you could say that there's also a certain feeling aspect to this. So if you have an education where there's a lot of movement and sensory enrichment through painting and drawing, and sculpting and drama, and then you also have storytelling, it has certain virtuous qualities into it, or even some peril, where the young person goes through an emotional journey as they hear and imagine the story. And they don't know what the hero or heroine is going to choose or how the story is going to end up. And they actually go on a ride through this journeying of the imagination and through their own feelings. All that is enrichment that helps to bring further feathering up into the thinking brain, to the neocortex, but importantly, it's what is one of the most elegant ways to get to the prefrontal lobes. If you have enrichment here and enrichment in the limbic brain, that's the way you get to the prefrontal lobes. But what's the importance of the prefrontal lobes? If this is the seat of instinctual qualities, this is probably the most truly human part of the brain. And if you put your hands here on your forehead, and just do it for a moment, that is where the prefrontal lobes are. And it actually feels nice to kind of have a little warmth there, doesn't it? And what resides in the frontal lobes is what the researchers are now calling executive function. They're calling it EF, the new IQ. But really, we could say it's the seat of our most wise discernment. It's where we can really weigh things and judge things. It's where we can make our best choices, where we can decide a good course of action by weighing all the different factors, and even to the point of moral discernment, one could say. So this is interesting, because if you've been in the school, if you've walked through the halls, if you've heard the children singing, or you've seen some of the book work they're doing, the different levels of artistic achievement that they're doing on a daily basis, the stories they're hearing, they're getting enrichment on all these levels. And this is also this threefold picture that Waldorf education has been standing for decades now. Because this is the willing aspect of the brain, and the feeling aspect, and the thinking. So it's actually in our neurology. But it's more than that. It's because we're not only beings of physical corporality and neural connection, but we're also beings of body, mind, soul, and spirit. And we need to educate that way so we have children who are fully developed in the richest way. But before we leave this neurological picture, I want to just make one other point, because what's really important for the young child is when they learn something, they have a chance to practice it and even to play with it. And that's one of the values of the arts. When a child gets to hear a story, learn something, and then turn around and render it artistically through painting, through drawing, through sculpture, through drama, they get to own it, and they wire it up in a totally different way than if they just read it in a book once and answered the questions on the test. Whenever there's a connection between neurons, if it's practiced and if it's played with, then the connections between the neurons begin to get coated by this very fine fatty tissue called myelin. And the myelination is what actually really protects the brain. But let's just have a little link up ourselves. So I'd like you to put your left palm up, and like a neuron searching for a connection, take the index finger of your right hand and put it in your neighbor's hand. Okay? So we're going to link up all across the room, because this is exactly what's happening with the children when they are learning things and they get to practice and play with it like they do here in your school, in the Prairie school, because they actually are getting to make all kinds of connections on a daily basis in the richest ways. And then they have a connection, and hopefully if they practice it enough, it does get myelinated. Now, keep yourself right there, because here's the game now, okay? So I want you to hold on to the connections, and then on the count of 3, just for fun. Now remember, one of the ways that you get the most enrichment is if you're, when we talk about movement and movement enrichment, it really needs to be coordinated, rhythmic movement. The more children have coordinated rhythmic movement, which is music in part, but anything where they're, clapping their times tables patterns, or they're stomping around the room, learning different grammar or math, by doing that through rhythm, that's going to help them. So let's do a little rhythm right now. I'm going to invite you to stand up. So I'm going to clap a pattern, and then I want you to repeat the pattern that I clap. Oh, you're very good. Now you're so good, I'm going to challenge you. So I'm going to do another pattern, and while you're repeating the first pattern, I'm already going to start the second pattern. Okay? So here we go. Now. Let's try it again. Here we go. Here we go. Go. Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, well, there's another interesting research here that we're going to involve. And this is the work of Howard Gardner from Harvard University. Now, Gardner came up with a model of multiple intelligences, and he spoke about all of these different rich possibilities. His idea initially was that a person typically would have a predominant intelligence, maybe 1, maybe 2. He said a really exceptional person might have 3 of these going at a time. So this would include logical linear intelligence, visual spatial, linguistic, musical kinesthetic, interpersonal, and naturalistic. He went on actually to add some other intelligences later, like existential and even a spiritual intelligence. But if you've been in the school and you know what your students are working towards, especially now that you have the upper grades. You look at this and you realize, well, that's, again, the whole of Waldorf education. That's the Waldorf curriculum, because they're getting exposure in all these different things throughout their years in the school. Linguistic intelligence, the school here has Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, and in the upper grades, in 7th, 8th, they're having French also. That awakens a lot of capacity for the young person if they get those centers of the brain really active. And your school is doing it in a wonderful way. And most Waldorf schools have at least one and often 2 languages. Musical intelligence, if you simply walk into the school on any given morning, you'll hear the classrooms just reverberating with the beautiful sounds of your children singing and playing recorders, and they have other instruments too. What other instruments do they play, Molly?
Ukulele and violin.
Great. And when you play a violin, you get this micro tuning where you have to really hear the pitch and get it just precisely right. And there's fine motor development, there's large motor development. Then you're playing in a group and you get the group working towards goals. There's all kinds of rich benefits for musical education and musical intelligence. Kinesthetic intelligence, this is about knowing and being able to map on learning on your body. And some children actually, this is their primary mode of learning, that they are kinesthetic learners. But isn't it wonderful when a young person gets coordinated in their body and they gain even something of an athletic ability and they move with grace and skill. And so here in the school, they're not only doing movement every single day, like mentioned, clapping and stomping their times tables in the early grades, but juggling and different kind of beanbag patterns. In 5th grade, they even do a beautiful event of the 5th grade Greek pentathlon. You have that here, yeah. And they prepare running and broad jump and Greek wrestling and discus and throwing the javelins. So they have this wonderful event, which is the first time they're really led to have a real competition, but not so much against others, but to do the best of themselves. But throughout the whole education, there is this effort to educate the movement aspect of the developing child, very importantly. Intrapersonal, of course, this has to do with, the more inter-reflective aspects of a person. And then, of course, there's a lot of emphasis in the classes and in the school of connecting the young people to each other in these class communities. And that includes also the parents working together. And that filters down to the children. But the children are taught how to solve problems with each other. And there's a lot of emphasis on building community and socializing and learning to get along with others. You have this very beautiful setting here, and this is helping support the naturalistic intelligence of the children when they get to walk over to Mud Creek and hunt for frogs and crayfish. You call them crayfish here or crawfish? Crawdads. Crawdads, okay. But of course this has to do a lot with the math curriculum in the Waldorf schools, and then this has a lot to do with geometry and geometrical thinking. And that starts in the very first day of 1st grade. As some of you may know, a classic lesson that many of your children probably did or will do is the teacher demonstrating to them the drawing of the straight line and the curved line. And that actually is the first lesson. And there's more to it than that. But the teacher leads them to then begin to discover in the world that all the world is filled with straight line and curve. And when you really start to think about it, that's true. When we see the straight line of the trees in the distance, or the curves of the eyes of our friends, and on and on. But it doesn't stop there. They get to ever more elaborate form drawings, and you can see some form designs that the 4th graders have done here. But it goes further than that. So this is what some of the 8th graders are doing, awakening this visual spatial intelligence, and this is from some of the work from students in the school. So from straight line and curved, here it is again in projective geometry in a beautiful fashion, and this is well done. Here's another example. Now, isn't that remarkable? And from a simple beginning, something that's really carried through all the years comes to fruition in real complexity. And there's math behind this, and it's really a wonderful thing. But you can see this is an example how something is being awakened in these intelligences. So this students here in this school, and Waldorf schools all over the world, they get all of these multiple intelligences awakened. And that serves them as real scale basis. Since I have that in my hand, I'm just going to show you a little more of how this artistic education works, because there's some nice upper grade work here. Well, for one, this is looks like a math cover sheet. And this is Albrecht Dührer's magic number patterns. You see, if you look at these patterns, you add these up and they all add up to...
Oh gosh, what is it?
Oh gosh.
For me,
Well, let's figure it out right now.
See, add it up quick. Like, what are those for?
Yeah, because they all add up to the same, and all the
Yeah.
patterns receive the same. It's really remarkable. What is the number in this particular magic square? Is it 15? 16. I think it is 16. Right.
I don't know, I just, because I don't know.
Which one were you pointing
You don't remember.
to? They all are twins?
No, they had a more...
More than that?
Yeah. Let's do the math. If 8th graders can do it, surely we can figure it out, right? So look, do you follow what the patterning is? If you look at each corner, add up the corners, the 4 corners, and that will actually reveal the number to us. I think it's 37 maybe, but I have to do this one to make sure.
Can you read the 4 numbers?
Sure, okay. 16, 13, 4, and 1. So that's 20, 30, 34, yeah. So every one of these patterns adds up to 34 then. And the students discover this, and they were led through their teacher to see the geometrical patterning in this. Okay, so that's some of the work, but then they also have been doing anatomy and physiology. So here's a student work on the human skull. Now see, a student doesn't just get to walk in and do this. And I also want to point out that Waldorf schools are not art schools, but rather when they get to do something day after day, week after week, month after month, they begin to grow in capacity. So here's the human skull. Here's also Chief Joseph. Here's another portrait of Gandhi. Martin Luther King. So what's also important to note, when a child is working in this way through the years, they begin to wake up an intelligence in the hand, because it really takes a lot of finessed, nuanced intelligence in the hand to be able to draw like that. Well, the brain discovers what the hand explores. The more subtle development you have in the hand, the more intelligence you get. And Waldorf schools have always been about working with the hands, working with the limbs, as well as bringing it up into the thinking. But we want to make sure that we really have, as the saying goes, nimble fingers, nimble minds. And that's what Waldorf students get to gain from. Well, this naturalistic intelligence is one other aspect I'll just say about this, because I really think that it's true that we can create wonderful schools and a rich curriculum in the Waldorf schools, and we have to recognize that the primary enrichment for all of us is time out in nature. And you have that wonderful opportunity here because nature is the mother of enrichment. No matter how beautiful we make the classrooms in any school, it will never match the complexity, the rich complexity of just walking outside by a stream under the light and shadow of the leaves, listening to the sound of the birds and the wind and the stream, smelling the loamy earth. That is so rich for sensorial development, and there's an intelligence in that too. Well, I wanted to actually start to move this a little bit towards a close so we have some time for conversation. And what I would say is that there's something in all of this where clearly the students are gaining skills in math, in world languages, in writing, in music, in all the different subjects that you experience, and even more in a very rich way. So they're learning the skills, but I would say what's unique about Waldorf schools is that they're also gaining a cultivation of capacities, because that's the actual intention of the education. So the teachers are aware that every day when they tell a story to the children, they're actually activating mental visualization. That they're actually awakening the imaginations of the children. Now just think what that gives a child who's been hearing stories since kindergarten, day in, day out, week after week, month after month, year after year. Once you have that imagination awakened, you have a different kind of human being at the end of 8 years, and even more different if they've gone all the way through high school. How many of you could see the gentleman in the story I told at the beginning of the talk, the old gentleman at the talk, with the red and plaid jacket and the frumpy hat, and yeah. I just think what it's like if you get to hear a good story, and not just a story, but some of the classic mythologies from the Norse and the Greeks and from Africa and from China. And then not only stories of mythologies, but real personalities, real people like Thomas Jefferson or Gandhi. And you hear about their life struggle, or Harriet Tubman, and you hear what they struggled with, their triumphs and their challenges, what they were able to overcome and achieve, and how they worked to bring something good for humankind. That not only is powerfully cultivating their imagination, but it's also beginning to waken up these higher aspects, where they might have the power to make a good judgment and even a moral discernment or something. So, the last part I wanted to touch on tonight, and we can have some conversation, is just looking at all of this together, what would really be steps for supporting the healthy development of children? So I've laid this out in this fashion. I think the first thing is to be sure that we're creating caring and supportive environments for the children, especially the youngest children, where they have their primary developmental directive, imperative, that they need to feel safe and secure in their environments. And all you have to do is go into the beautiful kindergartens here and see how this classic 1960s public school building has been transformed into a place of beauty and aesthetics. And the way the teachers are guiding the children through beautiful singing and their rhythms and routines, there is safety and security there, and they feel the true human caring. And it's not just in the kindergarten, but it's all throughout the grades and the way the teachers are working. But I think if we're going to have schools, if we're going to try to educate children, we have to really try to study and understand and enhance the child's development. Do we know about the importance of movement, of singing and music and arts for a child's development? And can we go even further than that to understand what's really unfolding at every different stage? Because it's not the same for a 4-year-old as it is for a 14-year-old. And we need to understand the differences of what's appropriate at the young level and what would best be saved for the child to maybe even a couple years later. And what would then be best saved for the 12-year-old or even the 17-year-old. How can we structure an education that's truly age appropriate so we're not pushing intellectualism down to the younger children because they're simply not ready for it. When the children are young, when the 4 and 5-year-olds, it's the body's turn. It's the time to get all that sensory motor development and then perhaps awaken a certain kind of thinking through imagination, and then later start to layer on some really intellectual richness and challenges when they get into the upper grades and they do the kind of work they're doing in Molly's class. And then of course, support the multiple intelligences. They have it all. We can have the children having all of the richness of those various intelligences and more. But this aspect that we would try to awaken and cultivate capacities so they have not only the skills and intelligences, but they have a capacity like imagination, but also capacities like innovative problem solving, the capacity to get along with others, the capacity for leadership perhaps. For you see, the value of capacities, once awoken and practiced, as a young person gets to have that for their entire life. We could teach certain skill sets right now to the children, but we really don't know what's going to be needed 20, 25 years from now, do we? But if they have the imagination, if they have a capacity like creativity, once awoken in a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old in practice, through their grade school years, they get to be a creative person when they're 17, and when they're 29, and when they're 43, and when they're 67, because that's the value of capacities. Once awoken and practiced and cultivated, they get to carry them as a gift throughout their entire life. So then, to make sure that's happening, you want to ensure enrichment through time and nature, through the arts and through music. So this being the graphic arts and the sculpture arts, but also the music and the drama arts. And then number 6, to support the social and emotional development within the context of community. So that there always is emphasis on socialization within the class community, but also with the whole community when we come together in festivals. And I believe you probably just recently had your Lantern Walk Festival, is that right? And then coming up soon, you'll probably have your Advent Spiral as we get into these dark weeks of the year. The whole community is coming together to celebrate the light and inner light that we carry and can carry into community. So this is part of the intention of a Waldorf school, and I would say is absolutely essential if we want to support the whole healthy development of the children. And finally, we want to be mindful and always laying the foundations for actual character building. Can we think about the children and bring them the stories and the activities and the working together in ways that they begin to have character and even a sense of ethics at an age-appropriate way that grows and develops as they get older into the middle school and someday, hopefully, here also the high school. So there's a verse that the children sometimes say at the end of the day. And I'd like to say that verse, and then I'd like to see if we could sing our song again, and then we'd just have a little conversation. So the verse goes like this: to wonder at beauty, stand guard over truth. Look up to the noble, resolve on the good. This leadeth us truly to purpose in living, to right in our doing, to peace in our feeling, to light in our thinking, and teaches us trust in the workings of God, in all that there is of time. But let's see what kind of thoughts are living in the group right now from what we've talked about tonight. And you have the handouts? Yeah, please. Please.
What's your elevator speech in describing Waldorf education?
Oh, well, I guess I would say that Waldorf education is an experiential, hands-on learning that ignites a lifelong love of learning. And it's an artistic approach to the academics, so the children get to anchor the learning through all kinds of artistic activities like painting, drawing, moving, singing, geometry. But I would say one of the things that the young people say when we have panels with the graduates, what they say again and again, what they learn from all their education, they invariably say they've learned how to get along with others. And I would say that is probably the most important thing in our times. Because look at the problems that are confronting us. They're all actually, every one of them, if you trace them back, they're of human origin. And they're showing an inability to get along with others. And if we look at even the recent economic downturn of 2008, that happened because people were making certain decisions for personal gain, and it actually tilted the whole worldwide economy. And Waldorf schools around the world saw drops in enrollment, as well as other economies that had far more damaging situations in third world countries where people actually have really struggled through the past decade, the past 8 years. But that's an example how we have to be working with the highest ideals to try to educate a young person to be able to make the good decision. And not just for oneself, but for one's community, so that they might have the ability to work towards serving their community and to get along with others. That's a long elevator speech, but that's what I would add tonight. Yeah, please, Molly.
Well, I just wanted to say that today I had a Waldorf graduate come to my classroom who's in his 20s and he's now a photojournalist. And the upshot of his talk to my students was exactly what you said, that he said, I can walk up to a stranger and look them right in the face and greet them with intelligence, and then I can earn their trust to have me come into their lives and photograph them, you know, for my newspaper. And that ability to build trust with people has gained him access to things that otherwise would be closed to him.
Yeah.
So he just said it over and over, whether it was not understanding math in high school and raising his hand like he was told he should have a red button on him because his hand just went up. He wasn't afraid to ask, and other students eventually said to him, I am so grateful for you asking, because I was too embarrassed to ask, or I was afraid to ask, or whatever. So it's that ability to just be in the world out there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Let's you. Next, please.
As a parent who I, hold these values and principles so close to my heart, and it just resonates. That's why we came here and made a major move to be here. In light of the recent events like the election and our daughter's hearing some of us talk about it, she's in 4th grade. And the world does come rushing in at some level. And I've been probably better at keeping it out when she was younger. And I sometimes am confused as to what's too much. And sometimes I'm just not sure, where to take information like politics. And yet it is something we discuss, and how to, she said, I'm interested, I want to know.
And how old is she?
She's 9.5.
9.5, yeah.
And yet I want to hold back, not do too much, but yet I'm not sure how to keep that balanced and healthy.
Right.
And certainly I don't just blurt it all out what I'm thinking.
Of course, yeah.
She does know my opinions, certainly, too.
Yeah.
So I'm just
I
curious.
would follow your instinct, though. If you feel like holding back seems sensible for her, 9.5-year-old. In the curriculum in the schools, so it's really in 8th grade, they get this incredible picture of modern history, including the revolutions of the 20th, the 1700s, 1800s, and 20th century, and what shaped our modern world. But they have more of an ability for political considerations after they've reached that age of 14 or so, 13, 14. And I would say for the younger child, have them hear the stories, the mythologies, the legends that have the same kind of drama as the politics, but they're actually suitable for them at their age. They will gain a certain wisdom because there's a wisdom in the collective unconscious that brought forth those mythologies, right? And save the real awakening for when they really start to wake up. Any of you who have teenagers know that your child, after about age 12, compared to when they were 5 or 6, that's when they really woke up, right? Right about 12, 13, you realize, oh yeah, they're a different person, and their personality is coming on full speed now, and they're really showing up more as an individual. And we just have to remember that the child, when they're younger, they don't actually think like we do. They want to absorb things, and they may hear things on the radio, on NPR or something, and they definitely want to hear our thoughts and opinions. But what is the right subjects, the right experiences to bring a child at what age? And that one I would just, there's no great harm done in that one, but I would wait. Personally, I would wait. You know, Holly shared some of my qualifications. My main qualification is I'm a parent of 2 Waldorf lifers. 6. They both went preschool through 12th grade at the Santa Fe Waldorf School. And my daughter went on to graduate with honors from Hendrix College in sociology and anthropology with an art minor. And my son hasn't chosen to go to college. He's actually, at age 16, he hiked the 500-mile Colorado Trail from Denver to Durango by himself. And then when he was a couple years later, he led a 6-month trip up in Vermont where they skied 300 miles up the length of the state of Vermont, and then they built basket packs, and they carved paddles, and they made moccasins, and they built a canoe, and they paddled the canoe 300 miles back. And then he went up in the mountains the next year with a bow saw and an axe, and he built himself a shelter at 12,000 feet in the autumn, and when the snows came, he hauled a titanium wood stove and a candle lantern, a stack of books, including War and Peace, up into the mountains, and he wintered at 12,000 feet.
What a remarkable... No, that's so
He's got this, right?
No, you need people like that. Those are the people who matter just as much as the people that go to college. Because he's on the different spectrum. He's the one that's going to teach the people who are out in college doing their thing. What if?
He's
You're so blessed.
definitely been
You're both
gaining an
spectrums.
education, and that's clear to me. Yeah. But he's also, you know, here's the other really remarkable side of his story, because when he was 6 and 7, he used to say, "Papa, you have to take me up in the mountains and let me spend the night all by myself." Preston, what about our backyard? No. Mountains. And then that shows something of, you know, this spiritual individuality that came through this young person. I can't claim, you know, I've been an outdoor educator and a wilderness guide and a NOLS instructor, but I can't claim his incredible strength of will and independence that he has. But I do give a lot of thanks to my colleagues and his class teacher and all the teachers and the high school teachers that helped give him opportunities that shaped a certain sense of purpose and courage and strength of will to be able to do what he's done. And I believe that someday he will go to college. He's a wilderness EMT now. He actually has gone that training. He's in the spatial dynamics training. So he's getting some further trainings, but he's done some remarkable things. But all of our children are capable of incredible, remarkable things if we support the intelligences and the capacities the way that you all are doing right here on the prairie with your children. This is a beautiful school. I'm so glad to finally come here and meet some of you, meet your children, and see what's unfolding here. Because there's some very good teaching. I've seen a little bit of the teaching, and I've seen some of the work. And I just want to congratulate you and hope that you keep going. Let's see what other thoughts are in the room. And then I think, let's see. Oh, yes, please.
Well, I think what I see is a lot of them, even at a young age, like the one I'm talking about is 6 and just turned 6. And he's just really comparing the world here. It's almost like he goes to the moon every day and then he comes back home. And he's like, so why, everybody's like this on the moon, but nobody's like this here. And I don't really, because I wasn't raised on the moon. So I'm like, well, that's how we are down here. So I don't really know how to bridge that gap.
That's great. Have you ever thought of being a Waldorf teacher? Yeah. You can walk on the moon every day. You know, that's interesting perspective, because I would just say that if you have time with your child, if you play with them, if you get out in nature, you'll walk the moon with them every day. You know, but you'll find your own connection in a good way. But I would also say, you know, find the ways to really slow down and cherish childhood. We have to recognize that childhood is this irreplaceable time in a human being's life. And once it's gone, it can't be replaced. And this modern tendency to push intellectualism and learning down at younger and younger ages, it begins to rob them of their childhood. But not only of the richness of childhood, but it robs them of the developmental supports we need to give them, of movement and play and imagination, where there's endless possibilities if you're in imaginative play. Well, the amount that they get to do that later on, they actually they become the ones who in the meeting say, well, I have an idea about that, because they've had something cultivated. And that, in a way, I think that imaginative ability and walking on the moon is exactly what we need. We need them to be able to stay imaginative as long as possible. They will get the intellectual training and the rigor. It's in the curriculum. But they need to have the practice of those more free, unstructured play times, and listening to the stories, and gaining something in their heart as well as in their brains that will carry them through life. That's what I would say to them. But enjoy your child. How is a boy, girl?
Boy,
yeah. And romp with them. And
yeah.
Get out and climb the trees and do that stuff with them.
Yeah, he doesn't want to stop.
Well, he will, though.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. He will. But, you know, I have to say, my son and I, this was pretty unique, but we had about 10 years where we did a lot of pretty big mountaineering together. We climbed some of the biggest peaks in North America, up in the Canadian Rockies, and roped up father and son, standing on ledges the size of this chair, 1,000 feet below us and 1,000 feet to go, and pretty special stuff. And I didn't, you know, create that. It was a shared passion that we had, and we ended up living some adventures together. And we still will. We were actually trekking in Nepal just a few weeks ago, so that was pretty awesome.
I'm just trying to get out of the bathroom at Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah. Okay, these are really good thoughts. We have just a little more time. Let's see what else might be living in the room.
Will you speak a little bit about media?
Okay, yeah, that is a big one, because especially if we're bringing our children to a school that's seeking actively to cultivate imagination, we have to recognize that as much time as a child has watching television or videos, or probably most potent and damaging of all, the computer gaming, that's going to erode their own image-producing ability. But it's more than that. If a child is going to come into the class and hear a story, but they've already seen the movie, the Disney version of it, for instance, if I said Snow White, what do you see? In your mind, most of us probably see the Walt Disney image, right? Because it has totally supplanted our own image-making ability. I remember well when the Lord of the Rings films came out, I absolutely loved the books as a young person. And I had read them 30 years before the films came out. And I was excited to see the films, and I actually think they're pretty well done, although the books are so much richer. And you can see that there's esoteric knowledge that Tolkien had. He was actually friends with Owen Barfield, who was a student of Steiner's anthroposophy. And so there was a connection between Tolkien and even anthroposophy. But at any rate, when those films came, I watched in my own mind's eye how my own images of all those characters evaporated. As the Hollywood actors supplanted my own images of those characters. And I can fight for them. If I really dig down, I can get them. But a young child can't do that. The media is too powerful because it's visual and it's auditory, and if you're in the theater, it's like something really intense, right? The sound and the big screen, it's something amazing. But it's more than that, I would say, too, because for one thing, I mean, why television? It's just commercials, and that's just brainwashing the children to buy this or that, or feel that they have to buy that to fulfill something in their life that they won't be worthy unless they buy that. So I wouldn't, we haven't owned a television. We have a TV, but we haven't been linked up to television for decades now. In fact, my daughter didn't see any screens at all until age 9. And she definitely didn't miss it. And we didn't even have her go on the computer till about age 12. And within just a few weeks, we were able to sit down and figure everything out. She knows far more than I do about computing. But really, computers don't really help your thinking. They're really largely procedural. And there's some neat things you can do, and we all use them, and they're invaluable tools. But what's the right age to bring it in? I would say cultivate the capacities for the young child. And when I mean young, I mean below age 12. Give them all of the richness we've talked about tonight with movement, time in nature, stories, painting, drawing. And save the other stuff they'll easily be able to catch up to. There's no harm. Here's one of the things that happens with screens. When the child is watching screens, the eye comes to an unnatural stillness. And the eye, like the hand, the more the eye is scanning, it's going from far distance horizon scanning to near pointed focus, that's also developing a certain, awakening a certain intelligence in the brain. And if the hand is lovingly following the movement of the eye in artwork, where they're drawing a portrait or doing a geometrical drawing, that's actually enriching the brain. But with watching the screens, there's a passivity that comes in when the child watches a screen. And it's very different from when they're hearing a story. We've all seen it. When a child is watching television, their face goes something like this. Right? But when they're hearing a good story from a storyteller who uses rich, vivid, descriptive language, who creates a living picture in the room, then they have a look like this. It's different. Can you see the difference? You've seen it in your children. And if you haven't, tell them a good story and see their faces go into a magic space. But when they're watching screens, what happens is it actually is activating, stimulating the brain, but it's not stimulating the higher regions of the brain. What it's actually stimulating is this lower hindbrain, reptilian brain structure. And therein resides those instinctual qualities of territorialism and breeding issues and hoarding issues and aggression. And every kindergarten teacher knows if after a weekend, if certain children have seen a lot of TV, they come back and they play more aggressively. Now, what's really tragic is the incidences that have been occurring in the past several decades with the very tragic mass shootings that have occurred, and especially the school shootings. In almost every case, those perpetrators have been very heavily addicted to video gaming, in almost every case. Now, I'm not saying that your child playing a computer game or watching TV is going to turn them into a mass shooter, but do we want them to go anywhere near that tendency? That would be the point. I would just say, in terms of media, as the later the better, and less the better. You know, if you sit together and you watch a select video, you know, once or twice a month, that's one thing. But if they're having a lot of time on screens, I think they're losing what's really essential in these early years is the ability to learn how to be connected and to get along with other human beings. They cannot learn that from a computer screen. Well, I want to thank you all for coming tonight, and I can stick around if anyone has any other thoughts or questions, but keep up the good work here on the Prairie, you pioneers. Thank you all very much.